SRE means a lot of things to a lot of people. Starting with the definition of it is really important. Setting those definition up front can avoid a lot of chaos down the road. Priority number one is, what is SRE?
There's a bunch of wrong ways to do it. It's more of a philosophical approach than it is a specific tool.
Putting those walls up really does lend to teams just shifting responsibility to somebody who is not me. SRE is not supposed to just totally take over.
SRE should be a very highly leveraged team. Another episode of Tech Council. We're going to talk about standing up an SRE practice. We have a couple of clients that are kind of going through this transition right now. It's something that I've been involved with a couple of times, and then you as well. And it's a complicated thing. And so we thought we'd spend some time just talking through what that looks like. And, you know, there's no one size fits all, but here's some gradients of it and we can talk through it. You got anything to add there?
SRE means a lot of things to a lot of people. Starting with the definition of it is really important. Setting the definition up front can avoid a lot of chaos down the road of like, I thought you were doing this. I thought you were doing this. Priority number one is, what is SRE?
Yeah. So first of all, for those of you that don't know the acronym, SRE stands for Site Reliability Engineering. It's a term that came out of Google. It was a special type of engineer that sort of rose to prominence coming out of Google. That was the first sort of hybrid software engineer, systems administrator. And Google were the first to really create a team that was dedicated to such things and really popularize the practice. There's a whole book. It's an O'Reilly book that was, I forget what it's called exactly. It's behind me here somewhere, but it's the official SRE book, basically, written by some of the engineers from Google that did that. And again, that's one iteration. I think one of the things we'll talk about today is it's very contextual. There is no one way to do SRE. There's a bunch of wrong ways to do it. We can talk about what some of those are, but it's kind of like DevOps in that sense. It's more of a philosophical approach than it is a specific tool. I think too often DevOps just got turned into CI/CD. Those became synonymous, and the DevOps team is the team that owns the CI/CD tools. And there's some truth to that, but I think it misses the nuance of the fundamental philosophical transformations that are meant to happen as a result.
And it leads to people throwing something over the fence and saying, hey, I'm going to have the DevOps team do this, and I'm going to have them do my CI/CD. Hey, the SRE team, go set up my monitoring, go set up my alerting. Putting those walls up really does lend to teams just shifting responsibility to somebody who is not me. So that's something good to be upfront about, is that this SRE is not supposed to just totally take over any of the reliability engineering from the app teams, at least in my opinion.
No, I mean, I think that's fair, right? Like, I think in its purest form, one of the big transitions, and even DevOps was, this is kind of a how did we get here type thing, right? Like, DevOps was meant to pull the engineer into more of the stack. Like, the software engineer isn't just writing code and then someone else's problem to build it and deploy it and get it shipped. The idea is you build it, you run it, right? Getting to that philosophical approach of you care for the full application lifecycle, not just the in-sprint development aspect. So SRE is a way to sort of come alongside that, have a specialty layer. One of the things that we'll talk about, one of the things that SRE is not. We've seen this over and over in multiple places where people take the existing ops organization that is designed around this group builds something and this group runs something and they throw it over the wall and it's now your problem. And those folks are rebranded as SRE because SRE is now the new cool term and these people get to advance in their careers and get paid more money and all these things. That's not what SRE is. And this has implications on the financial model, has implications on all these things, right? Like, SRE should be a very highly leveraged team. The old classic ops models were geared towards the number of applications or the number of teams. And, you know, for every 5 engineers, you had to have an ops person or something like that. So it would scale linearly with the overall organization. Well, SRE is actually intended to be highly leveraged. It's not meant to be that way. It's meant to be a supporting organization that helps enable the application team. But the responsibility still stays in the application team's purview.
They're a Sherpa. They're the ones guiding you along the way. Don't step on this landmine. Don't fall down this gorge. Here's the right way to do things. We're not going to do it for you. In some cases, they will. I mean, I've seen really good SREs putting in pull requests to an app to enable a certain kind of logging or observability, but that's not their primary focus, is to do all the work for someone else. It's to make sure that your apps are meeting the criteria of the best practices for monitoring. Like I said, it could be them doing a little bit of that, but I've seen the best success at them putting guardrails around what you should be monitoring Here's where your gaps are in your monitoring, and having the app teams do a lot of that. That seems to have not only pulled a lot of burden off of them, but now that those practices are built into the fundamental, I guess, the success criteria of an app team. We haven't looked at our monitoring. We haven't looked at our tooling. We haven't looked at this. So before the SRE team comes and yells at me, I'm going to start doing that, because if I don't, I know they're going to come knocking at my door telling me that I've missed my health checks.
If we take a step back, right, like what is SRE responsible for? Like if you think kind of classic racy type of things, the SRE team is more accountable than they are responsible, in my opinion. Like if I'm setting it up and I'm the VP of engineering or CTO or something like that, that's how I would approach it, where I would say, okay, hey, I want my Apex engineers in the SRE seat. They are consultative more than anything. They're still fingers on keyboards folks, but they're also ones that work with the application teams to help them design their monitoring schemes, to help them design their automation, help them think about their systems in a way that makes them sort of anti-fragile and makes them fail gracefully and all those different things. It's like an architectural role, but you're like much more in the weeds with the team.
And that means bringing them along early. I've seen great success bringing them in early to a design and being a consultant on, hey, here's my idea, here's my architectural diagram. Where are my gaps? Where do we need to have a better design so that we don't have failures? Or if we do, like, what's some tweaks that we need to make? So it does mean bringing them in early. Doesn't always happen, but in
a really healthy organization, as you have this thing stood up, what will happen is your handful of SREs will have great relationships with all the key people in the app that they're responsible for, sort of that they're aligned to, and then they'll want the expertise from those people. What you don't want your SRE team to turn into, although sometimes it has to start this way, is like a checklist, sort of the checklist mafia, that are like the people that are like making sure you're good enough, like the production readiness checklists and stuff like that. That's a necessary evil. You got to do that, and it's productive. And I've built many of them, and you need to go through and have that independent verification of things. But that too easily turns into something antagonistic and confrontational, and it should not be, right? The SRE team should not have an antagonistic relationship with the app teams. I think the Sherpa was a great example, right? Like if you're trying to climb Mount Everest, you're not looking at that Sherpa with any sort of antagonism or any sort of frustration. Like that's the guy that's bringing your oxygen along so you can actually survive this thing, right? Like that's their job.
Yeah, if the app goes down, it's both your fault. If there's a major outage, it's both your fault. To your racy comparison, you're both almost a bit responsible and accountable for that, because if something doesn't happen, something does go wrong, the SREs are going to be just as much as, why weren't you involved in this earlier? Why didn't you have those relationships built out? Why didn't you have some sort of eyeballs or practices to avoid this from happening? So both of you would be on the hot seat a bit for failures like that.
The key is getting aligned on the uptimes, getting aligned on the SLOs and all those different things. And we'll get into some of the practical, steps in that. I've said this before on this podcast, right? Like to me, there's two very particular values that the SRE practice has sort of brought software engineering. One is this concept of the blameless postmortem, and that practice. This is like a key practice, and really being strong and systematic in doing that. The other one is this concept of intentional toil reduction. And that can be something as somebody's got to go on and do a rolling restart on all the pods because they're every 12 hours or whatever. Like, well, we're going to automate that or put a trigger on it or whatever, right? Like, so there's building automation that's just to do normal things, but then also like, where are all the friction points? They're like human sandpaper. They go find the friction points in the operational flow and help remove those kind of high points so that the system can function more efficiently. And so the app team should almost always appreciate and welcome that sort of intervention, I would think.
And that's where their success criteria just has to be defined as such, to make sure that, is the system becoming more stable? Are the friction points reducing? Are we having a lower failure rate going to production? Is our uptime failure rate, is it all improving? So that's where I have designed some of the metrics for the SRE team. Is how do we know? We got to measure it. And so that's where we started.
If something breaks, is it SRE's fault? Like, you could make some debates on that because, for one, things are going to break. Mean time to detect and mean time to restore, I think, are the key metrics for SRE. If you've got a system that your typical incident takes 10, let's say 2 hours to fix, then you've got some problems, right? Like, that's not good, right? Like, if you've got an incident where your mean time to restore is in the minutes or seconds or low single digit minutes, that's an indication that you've got a good SRE practice, because your SRE practice has bled into your application development and deployment procedure. The only way you have a mean time to restore under 5 minutes is you've got a really good monitoring solution and you've got a really good rollback solution. Most problems happen during change. I mean, we've seen this before, right? Oh, yeah, look at us. We've got our great pipeline, blah, 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 blah. All this stuff is great. Oh, shit, something broke. All right, well, we got to put it in the pipeline, which means it's got to go to dev, then it's got to go to QA, and then it's got to get signed off on and go to prod. So the absolute quickest time to production is like 47 minutes or some nonsense. And like you're just sitting there, it's a one-line fix and it took you an hour to get it in. Like that was a big failure, right? Like, and I was responsible for some stuff when we first realized that. And I was like, oh man, what a blind spot we had.
Well, some of the builds would take 30 minutes themselves. Just to build into dev would take 30 minutes. So let me add some additional context around my statement before about SRE and failures and in the hot seat, because I think there's some context there that we need to dig into. Is that a failure happens? Yes, as you said, failures are going to happen. Errors are going to happen. An app is going to go down. Now, it's not the SRE team's fault that it happens, but why weren't they involved in that earlier on? Because they're going to be the ones that are going to have to run that incident. They're going to be the ones that are documenting the incident. If there's a data exposure, they will be involved in data security teams and making sure that practices were or weren't followed. So whether they're directly or indirectly involved in the incident, they are still in that quote unquote hot seat to make sure that they are documenting these failures, they are pushing the improvements, and they are putting something in their practice to say, well, how could we as the team have avoided this?
Yep.
And so, yes, they are still responsible in my eyes of finding out how are we still having failures if your release checklist is being followed, if all these other processes you have are being followed. Why do we still have failures? Well, of course, within reason. Again, things are going to go down, but if there's large outages that are totally blindsiding everyone and hadn't been thought about before, like, oh, we didn't think of that scenario. Well, those are things that should have been discussed earlier on in the design and consulted the SRE team on, or the team should have been engaged with those app teams during the build out to make sure that the best practices are being followed and they have the right monitoring.
So, I mean, I don't disagree with what you're saying, but what I would say is like, I think fundamentally, if I repackage what you're saying just a little bit to try to like make sure we're saying the same thing here, right? Like fundamentally, the post-mortem, like what you're talking about, right? That kind of 5 whys process of really digging in, okay, like, what happened here? Like using my example of the time to detect was 3 minutes. What we thought was the solution at 7 minutes. The system wasn't fixed until 47 minutes. Okay, why? Okay, well, it's because in order for that deployment to go through, it had to be tested here, da 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 da. And it's like, okay, why? It may come back to we missed something in the design process. And that's going to sound awful, right? Like, and that's the thing about these postmortems and stuff. When you put it very sort of matter of fact, it sounds brutal. If you do it well, the point is you get down to the real building blocks of why the thing failed. And then you educate everyone on that, and then that shit doesn't happen again, right? Like you just don't have the same problem again. The cool thing about an SRE practice that if it's working well is you just don't have the same problems twice. Oh man, that bit us. It won't happen again though, because now we can prevent that from happening by either a procedure change or an automation change or whatever it is. That I think is the big philosophical shift. And not to say that we haven't had like problem management and all that type of stuff in the past. Like that's always existed. But I think the difference in SRE and app teams compared to like sort of the typical ITSM, ITIL processes that have previously existed is like these are much more a shared responsibility. They're much more of a synchronous or synergistic process by which everybody's kind of responsible for the overall health of the system. And so we're going to figure out ways to prevent problems from happening so that we don't have to get up at 3 a.m. and we don't have to deal with upset customers. That to me is the big shift, is that collaboration and the sense of being willing to take accountability for making sure it doesn't happen again.
Right. Exactly. And that's the thing. If it does keep happening, why? Repetition of why. So that's the thing where I'm going to is that, yeah, you could have the incident, you can have the postmortem, but if you haven't put a process in place to avoid that from happening again, well, that's why as well. And also to the pipeline issue, in a mature practice, those scenarios would have been thought of before they were to happen. A dry run of an incident should be happening. And I know that some very good teams do that. They do a dry run of an incident and say, how long would this take to resolve? Oh, man, this pipeline's taking 45 minutes to get through. Like, Okay, what's our practice to get around that?
We were both at a place when I had a lot of influence in kind of horizontal tech, and I saw this. I actually pulled the stop on the assembly line, and I said, "Hey, we need to reclassify all change that does not have a canary style rollback to high risk change." That was one of the things we did. We'd gotten pretty good at change, and so people were able to deploy at like 5 p.m. This was a bank. That was a little aggressive. The market was closed, but it was still business day. But we knew our traffic. But it was kind of balancing quality of life for the teams and the risk. But then we had one of these incidents where it took like an hour to fix it, even though it was like a one line change. And we knew exactly what it was, and it was like, oh shoot, this is a massive problem. This was one of the ways we got some people to not be upset with us. Said, hey, we're going to reclassify all changes high risk. If you can't go back to the previous version as a result of an alert instantly without a deployment, you are now a high risk change, and you basically had to deploy overnight during off hours, so that the risk of impact, because it might take too long, because a deployment was just too slow, right? And so if you had to do a deployment to fix something, it was a high risk change, and we pushed it back. That was really effective. It sucked for a lot of teams, but it also created a great incentive to get people to adopt good canary practices way faster.
And also treat this as a chance to come up with something new. Like, hey, we have something, but it's not good enough. Let's use this as kindling to design a new release practice. From that, there were some new blue-green practices being developed. There was some new canary release strategies using some really cool tech that was a snap of the fingers to roll back to a different version of a Lambda, for example, that really pushed the needle to continually to reduce that MTTR.
Some of that architecture was cool. We should do a video on that sometime. We should pull up, like, use Lucidchart or whatever, and sort of pull up a reference architecture of that and walk people through it. Because there are some really cool things you can do, especially in the cloud, especially depending on your layers that you have with things like API gateways and stuff like that give you, like, SharePoint instantaneous rollback.
The gateway is the big part there, being able to switch and do a blue-green, really healthy, fast, quick rollback. So that would be a good topic.
Yeah, for sure. So, okay. So moving on from kind of the sort of philosophical, I think we hit that, to the practical steps, right? You're the director, senior director, VP, executive director, or whatever that's responsible for rolling out an SRE practice. Where do you start? I'll say this a bunch, but the context matters. What is the current environment is a big consideration. You're going to have almost certainly, unless you're a small company and you're just now for the first time deciding, hey, we need some horizontal operations functions, you're going to have some sort of legacy ops thing. Most bigger companies, like they've got this giant ops org that has been a kind of throw the ball over the wall and very arm's length separation. They do everything in production. Dev teams do everything in dev, and that's that. Depending on what that looks like, it's going to impact a lot of this. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but I do want to say, like, not every situation is the same, and it's a journey, right? Like, it's not something you snap your fingers and all of a sudden you're good at. It's a messy process. It's hard. We mentioned monitoring, we just kind of glossed over it. Getting really good at observability requires a lot of intentionality and a lot of iteration. And also, to be fair, a lot of budget. It's expensive. I ran Datadog for a banking organization, and my Datadog bill was more expensive than my CIO's AWS bill, right? The point is, observability is expensive. It doesn't matter. It could be Splunk. It could be even CloudWatch gets expensive, right? So,
and it's easy to spiral out of control there. That's something that you have to be super intentional with. We don't need to spend too much time on this, but you need to spend a lot of time on designing your logging practices when you start to monitor like this, because otherwise you're going to be spending, as you said, a massive amount of money on some of these tools. So where you start, I mean, is just creating that charter, right? You just start with, what is this? What are we doing? What does this mean to be successful in this team? And that's going to be something that I've seen has got to be pitched against those existing legacy teams, because it could be seen as a turf war.
One other point to the previous thing before we go into the charter thing is, FinOps is a big part of this. Depending on how many people, you might need somebody dedicated to those tooling to make sure the spend is appropriate. I remember with this one bank, I would probably once a month just log into AWS Cost Explorer and just play around, and then save 15 grand a month just by, like, catching stupid things. You need people paying attention to that for cloud spend and all that type of stuff. But observability is another layer to that, because it can get really expensive. But back to what you're saying, the charter. Yes, that's exactly where I would start. If I'm having a conversation with leadership and you're talking about putting together an SRE practice, that's the first thing. Even before you've really hit the funding model and all those different things, what's the scope? Draw the box. Like, what's this team going to be responsible for? The last time I did an SRE, there was still that sort of legacy op model. And we were doing those things in parallel. And so we were double spending in a lot of ways. We were taking things that they were theoretically responsible for, and we were going to do them ourselves.
So that causes a lot of headbutting if you don't design that right. Even if you do design it right, there's going to be a lot of headbutting, but also confusion with the team. So that's got to be documented upfront and surfaced to everybody involved so that there's clarity of, wait, there's two teams now. Who do I talk to about something?
And that's where I think we had the most issue. The cool thing about observability and monitoring and ops and stuff like that is like, nobody really minds if you do more of it, right? Like it's not the stepping on toes isn't so much in that respect. It's like, oh, you built your own dashboard. Well, this is my dashboard. Like people don't tend to get that upset about those things. It's like, oh, cool, you did another version of what I'm doing. There maybe there's something interesting. Like people don't tend to get bent out of shape about that. But I think the other point you made has happened a lot, right? It's like, okay, well, are you duplicating process now? Are you saying, okay, I've got to clear this with you and with these people? Like all those types of things. So you got to figure out the RACI, and that's part of, I think, the charter process. And I went and negotiated this. I went to those ops teams and I said, okay, hey, this is what today looks like. This is what we want to propose as phase one of an SRE rollout, where we're moving you guys from responsible to accountable, or responsible to informed, or accountable to informed, or whatever, consulted, et cetera. We're moving the levers, and we would negotiate that out. The cool thing is ops teams are usually drowning, and so they're usually cool with all that. And also, centralized ops teams, it's a really hard thing to do. We used SRE in kind of a federated fashion. It was still horizontal, but it was closer to the app teams. You get this domain expertise built up and all those different things. And so that tended to work, and because they saw the SRE teams as reinforcements. So that helped. And that was, and to be fair, like to pat myself on the back a little bit, that was a framing that we put on it too, right? Like we didn't frame it as these guys suck, they're useless, they're worthless, we're going to do better than them. We framed it as, hey, like they've got a big enterprise to worry about. We have some localized challenges we want to focus on and help supplement what they're doing, and to take some of the load off of them that they can't get. So some of that's messaging.
And that's a fine line that has to be drawn in here, because just because the ops team, they hear that at one level, the repetition of that and coming from the SRE team, here's what we're doing, here's our role, here's our responsibility with the ops team and the app teams. There can be a lot of confusion at first with, well, I'm going to prod now. Who do I need to loop in? Who am I KTing to? Is it ops? Is it SRE? Is it both? So there's a lot of framing. There's a lot of conversations that need to have, and a lot of pitching to the teams of, here's where you need to go. Here's who you need to talk to. Here's doing the run book. It's got to be spelled out for everybody, or else it will cause a lot of chaos, and a lot of teams just won't know what to do, who to listen to, and they'll hear two different messages.
You codify all this in the charter. We had the whole episode talking about the charters. I think we use sort of SRE as the template to talk through that, but that's the key. Like you've got to get all that stuff flushed out. You don't have to solve everything. Like it's a journey. Maybe you call some of that out. You say, hey, for the first 6 months, it's going to be like this, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do that. Or maybe you just say, here's phase one, and we're just going to define the whole thing around phase one, and we're going to evolve it from here. I would probably have that in your charter. It might be useful for you to internally write down where you think you want it to go for conversations. I would actually crystallize on your V1 and say, this is our target. This is how we're going to operate. And then this is, again, just very briefly, back to what you're talking about, success criteria, key responsibilities. The RACI chart is important, very important for this function, because of the complexity of legacy functions, the complexity of all the different tasks. And it's not really handoffs, but like how it flows through the organization. So get that right, because also that informs the next thing you have to do, which is how are you going to staff this team? You mentioned this before, like what's the funding model? Is it gearing? Are you going to fund a steady state? Is it a ramp up? Are you staffing from existing teams? Are you taking people from the app teams? Are you taking people from the ops teams? That is a really complicated thing. And I will say the most common thing is you take people from the ops team and you call them SREs now. I don't want to say that can't work. I will say that statistically speaking, that's not going to work most of the time.
It's a different skill from ops to SRE. SRE is getting more of a deep dive. They're that depth charge that goes really, really deep with the teams and understands more about the full ecosystem for the team. You mentioned the federated model, because that works. You have certain SREs who know a space better than others, where an ops team might be at the top level for a high level observability. Hey, this is down. This function is down. The SRE team is going to get much, much lower level and get into not necessarily coding practices, but understanding what gears and bolts are under the hood there to be able to hey, I know exactly where this is. I know which container this is. I know which Lambda this is. And here's the problem that needs to be solved.
Yeah, I mean, I would even go so far as to say in some of these organizations, it's actually where you're like, it's like kind of your staff engineers. It's the people that can do a bunch of stuff. It's a hybrid role of a really good software engineer that understands systems administration and understands architecture. Especially in some of these corporate environments, right? Like if you become a really good engineer, like a really, really good engineer, you move into this sort of broader role, and SRE is actually a good place for that to sit. You're in a broader kind of pseudo architecture, pseudo ops, pseudo just make shit better role.
I don't know what you do. Whenever you're here, everything's better.
If you have those type of people floating around your app teams, those are good candidates to put into SRE. If you've got ops people that really can know code and really know how to get into that, sure, that can work. Generally speaking, in most corporate environments, ops people are not your highest tier talent. That's not a blanket statement, but like in the places I've been, it tends to be, something that gets offshored a lot. It's not necessarily your top tier folks. And you really want really good talent on these teams. You want these people to instantly have credibility when they walk in the room.
And that comes with a lot of communication skills too. There's somebody who can be in an incident and be just as comfortable talking to a software engineer as they would a CIO and be able to clearly articulate the problem in something that's not going to set the barn on fire by something that they say. So
that's my job.
My point is that the role is critically important, not only their technical skills, but their communication. Somebody who can't join an incident and explain what's going on, ask the right questions, they're probably not going to be successful as an SRE. They can help with some tooling, but communication is a very, very important skill to have. And they don't have to use all the right words every single time, but they have to be clear of what the problem is and what they're doing to solve it or what somebody else needs to solve it. And shortcut all the other stuff.
Yeah, and you have to be persuaders too, right? Like the SRE role is, in many ways, your job is to like go out there and help people get better. So you have to convince them that they need to get better, right? Like it's like, hey, you've got a big gaping hole in your car. You need a new door or something like that. If you're the kind of engineer that knows you're smart and knows you know everything and everybody should just listen to you because you're right, it's going to be a rough go, right? Like it's not going to work super well because you're just going to alienate the heck out of everybody. Two of our top guys were like these super soft-spoken, gentle souls. They're like the nicest guys in the world. Like they're absolute killers on the tech. And they were great in stressful situations. They didn't get bothered. They would ask questions. They were like little human Labradors. Like they were just the nicest guys in the world. They did not put off any airs, but they commanded enormous respect across the organization because they knew their shit. And everybody knew they knew their shit, but they never lorded it over anybody, right? Like they never were like, hey, I know more than you. Shut up, right? I mean, I did that occasionally, but that was different. The guys who were really successful never did that. That's an important skill too. It's like you have to take on the mentality of I want to help these guys. I care about these engineers. I want them to be successful, care about our customers. In this context, it was a bank, right? So that we want people to get to their money and make their transactions and all those things. It's an elite group, but they can't be elitist, right? Like they have to be kind of down to earth and kind of workmanlike, right? Like their job is, again, to like shave off the edges and make things a little bit better every day. Because you make things a little bit better every day at the scale of an SRE organization, you make things way better over time.
Yeah. A good SRE is orders of magnitude more important than a good engineer. I will take all-star engineer because they just make everything better. They're sitting at the position of, I can really figure out where the problems are and tune the dial so that it's significantly better. And then you got some nice dashboards to see, but then they're designing the practices. They're designing, here's how you should be running your apps. Here's how you should be running your observability. And so then they can do that. They can also get into there and tell you, oh, you got to, tune this memory, tune that setting. And this is, you're going to get better. And it's things that people wouldn't even think of.
They're super high leverage. It's a super high leverage role. One of the interesting things, I remember having a conversation with a senior guy in an InfoSec org. I remember talking to him. I was like, I feel like I know a lot about this stuff. I feel like I know a lot about tech. I feel like I know a lot about, but I've always kind of like see the hacker movies and all these different things. Like maybe there's a whole other level of stuff that I don't know anything about. Like maybe there's all these genius people and all their super fast typing and all these things. And maybe those people still do exist. But what this guy said to me was something to the effect of, I mean, really, he's like, yourself or some of your good engineers could be really great security guys too. It's simply a matter of emphasis and where you put your focus. You have been focused for years on building new stuff and shipping code and all these different things. Whereas, these guys are just focused on finding gaps and finding holes and things like that. When you think about like what differentiates an SRE from a talent or caliber standpoint from the actual engineer, it's just focus and interest. One guy on my team, he was an SRE and he was supposed to be on his day off and somebody else was on call, but he saw something that was going on and he jumps on at like 7 o'clock at night. He's still there at midnight. I'm like, Suresh, what are you doing here? Why are you on this? Like, you're not feeling well. It's your day off. You were just on call. You don't need, he's like, I can't let it go. Like, he's like pathologically
I think I've had the same conversation with him.
unable to like, not like, it was a video game. It was a puzzle that he needed to solve, right? Like, it didn't matter what the fact that, he had been at it and he'd been working like a dog and we're trying to tell him to log off and get some rest or something. He like literally couldn't let it go from a puzzle standpoint. So some of it's just like interest and like how you're wired. That makes a big thing. So staffing, back to kind of overall, like it doesn't all have to be those apex guys though. You can also have a mix of maybe slightly more junior folks that those guys are then mentoring. You don't want a bunch of alphas. You want a mix of talent, right? A mix of stages and things like that. But
yeah, what I had some success with towards the end of my tenure as managing an SRE team is I started to partition off some developers on the team. So you have your triage managers, your incident managers, your monitoring, but then we had some people who were just dedicated to, you're not an incident manager. You are building those tools. You are tapped into what they're doing. And you are now building some tools around that to you're the SRE of SREs to make their process better and now put it into some automated platform so they don't have to do some of those things again. So that was an interesting go about it to codify the SREs and to automate the SREs. So that was fun.
Yeah, I hated that though. Like I still philosophically don't like that. Like I know why you guys did it. I know you had some success there. As a rule, you want to be spending no more than 50% of your time on toil reduction, right? Or the minimum or whatever. Like that's the target. As you look at your capacity as a team, even though it's a kind of a weird team, usually like a Kanban style team for like planning purposes, you want to be at that 50% toil thing. The easy way to do that is do what you just described. Hey, we're going to have some people that are going to do non-toil related stuff, and then these guys are going to do nothing but toil reduction. And essentially, the higher level folks are going to do all the incident stuff and then drop work into the other teams to do. I guess it can work.
It worked because you can get so wrapped up into, I do this thing, but how do I prevent more of those from happening? And so you can get so booked into looking at incidents, triages, doing the postmortems, that you need somebody who is dedicated to looking at the air above them and clearing that air so that they can do less of those. And they can work more on some of the right tools, but how can you make something that get them their answers faster? Because you're never going to go away with having to have somebody into the incidents, but you can build tools to get them the answers faster. And that's what the people were focused on. Yeah.
So again, it's fun that we have this to disagree about, because like my issue there is you're breaking apart what SRE is and you're not making everybody be an SRE. You're creating two entirely different classes of function. You essentially have a traditional ops function and then an SRE function that you're sort of are in the same team. Now, maybe you have a higher talent density in your traditional ops people, the people that are doing all the incident ops type stuff. I think the harder thing to do, but potentially better, is to cycle everyone through both of those functions. When you're on call, you're not building new scripts and stuff like that. Fair enough, right? But when you're off, like have the discipline to not be getting sucked into whatever the problem of the week is, and have some time to say, okay, here's all my learnings. Let me go build.
Yeah, but that takes practice to get there, though. It's not something that can be overnight success there. So if you're in a team where there's so many incidents going on, I don't have time to breathe. You've got to have a forcing function to say, I'm going to add some capacity that's dedicated to this. And in time, when you do have that more room to breathe, because some of the dedicated capacity has reduced that toil, reduced that, it's going to take me 2 hours to even diagnose this issue. That's reality. But what can we build to reduce that 2 hours down to an hour so that now next time I have my answer quicker, the incident's over quicker, and I have some of that time. But you've got to invest in that a little bit to be able to get your core SRE team the ability to get to that point.
Maybe. I mean, there's different ways to skin the cat. Like, again, like you guys did it that way. It obviously was working for you. My issue with it is it's a cheat code, right? Like, to your point, it's like, hey, the toil's too high. We need more capacity in order to get some headroom so that we can actually start to reduce the toil. Like, that's a valid point, but it might be a valid point, right? But you're saying, okay, we're going to then use that as dedicated toil reduction instead of giving everyone 5% of headroom and then having everybody do toil reduction. And so by doing that, and again, I know all the people involved, so I know exactly how this happened. And from a practical standpoint, it was probably a perfectly fine thing to do. I'm not criticizing it as other than to say, like, on paper, I don't love it because it doesn't force the behavior change for those other guys. It doesn't force them to do both and to pull away and let someone else carry the burden and then do this other stuff. Because a lot of that was based upon the fact that you had 2 or 3 people that would not disengage. They would always be the hero into those situations. But if you can teach them to disengage and let someone else carry the burden at that time, and then they can do the other stuff, that's hard. You got to work yourself into that culture.
It's that, what do you have as far as your skill set on the team? Because SRE is a hard job. To do it right, it's a very, very hard job. And you can't just hire anybody off the street to do that. Because not everybody wants to do it. You're on a lot of incidents. You run on calls. You're a little bit everywhere. So it's not something that everybody's immediately going to say, hey, I want to be an SRE. It's not like that. Or nor do you want somebody who's just fresh off a developer gig and say, now you're an SRE, now you're going to run it. It doesn't work that way. You have to then change your practices. You can't get the right people to do that. You have to change your team to make it be more welcoming so that you can have more people wanting to be on the SRE squad, so that maybe in time you can find the right person for that and get to where you're going. But you've got to be able to buy some time for those. So there's multiple ways to do it. Like, what you're saying is correct. You reduce the toil for everybody. That's the right place to go if that's an option for you. If there's not an option, you've got to pull other levers to be able to build out your team, to be able to reduce the toil for the SREs so that they can spend time reducing it everywhere else. That's what we're focusing on.
I mean, it's all totally fair. And I mean, again, there's, like you said, there's more than one way to skin the cat, and there's different ways. But I think if you're starting from scratch.
Oh, you don't do that from scratch. No.
That was a situation where you sort of inherit a bunch of bodies that were talented people, but they didn't really sign up to be SRE, right? And so you're supplementing, you're using their development capacity to help the SRE mission. And again, as you think about your budget is also, you also could put work back on the teams, right? So sometimes what the SREs would do is we would just define the thing that needs to be done. And if we didn't have the capacity to do it, we would just give it to the team themselves. And sometimes, based on the nature of it, we might define the thing and say, this absolutely has to be done by the app team. Like maybe it was, for example, hey, you need to put in some better failure handling on API calls. Like maybe you need a circuit breaker pattern, or maybe you need like a progressive back off, or different things like that. You're missing stuff in your application that will make it more fault tolerant, right? Well, it's not really appropriate. I mean, not that SREs can't do that, but that's not really their job to go and do that work. But they could write up the ticket and say, here's an NFR, app team, you need to go do this. And then
I would argue that they should never do that, because there's too much context in an app to design some of those patterns and write them, because now you're involving your SRE team in maybe a new feature or something else. So that the ticket is the right approach to that, but also it's setting those patterns so that the teams can measure themselves against what those practices are. If I'm putting a new queue in, do I have a dead letter queue? Do I have API retries? So that those things should be shoved in the app team's faces and say, you're not done until these things are done.
SRE's job should be to identify the problem and help design the solution. Again, it's almost an architectural role, but with more skin in the game and more post-production, not just on paper. And then can I help the team do that? But not, I agree with you, they shouldn't do it themselves. And that's actually one of the things you have to work out in your charter and you're getting your buy-in with your partners is like, hey, we're not extra capacity for you. Like that's one of the things that I've seen. That's actually one of the biggest traps and one of the biggest things to look out for is actually you'll get the inverse. App teams will try to throw work your way and be like, hey, we have a certificate issue. Go fix that for us. Or we need to renew, whatever the thing is, right? Like, can you go take care of that for us? Because it's ops related. My response to all that was always absolutely not. Go away. That's your job. You run your app. Now, what we would try to do is we would write scripts to help automate that. And so sometimes we would let some of that stuff sort of bubble and we would like play with it so that we could figure out enough to automate it and give them tools to do that type of stuff. But yeah, you have to upfront set the right boundaries with your teams and say, this is our job. This is your job. This is where we overlap. But we're not doing these things. We're not doing those things.
And sometimes that's more important than what you are doing so that you don't cause more chaos and confusion. Yes, of course, that what you are responsible for, very, very important, but making sure that it's the will not do, won't do, not going to happen. That's clearly identified in your charter so that there's no confusion of what you're supposed to be doing. Because it could just be a catch-all, like you said.
100%. All right, cool. As you start to do it, what I'd say, like, try to find some early wins. Some of this is a cultural thing that's going to take some time, but try to find key things where you are and start where you are. Recognize where you are from the maturity curve. Don't be upset. It's not just a technical transformation or organizational transformation. It's a cultural transformation. You're likely asking the teams to take on more responsibility than they've ever taken on before. The app teams themselves. You're likely taking responsibility from a centralized organization, and you're taking a bunch of it, and a bunch of it's going to the app teams. That's going to be a big shock to them. They're not going to like being on call or whatever. So, there's a few things you could do. I would say first thing to focus on, you need an on-call schedule. Like, get that set up. You need a tooling for that. Start that practice of blameless postmortems.
On the on-call is something that's automated. The tooling has to support some automation of putting somebody
Absolutely.
on call. So there's no gaps. There's nobody who's on call. You can always see it, but also other teams can see who's on call as well, because there's other teams that we've noticed that need to know, who do I contact? Either it's you have a single source of call this number and the person on call will be available, or here's the list, ping them on Teams, Slack, whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's got to be publicly available.
Yeah. And there's lots of tools, obviously, PagerDuty, OpsGenie. There's lots of tools that do that. To your point, you could just have a calendar too, and Slack channels and things like that. But get something up and running. And I would say you should have a mix of the app teams and the SREs in there. You can negotiate that out. Are the SRE the first line of defense? Are they going to be the ones, or are the app teams going to be the first line of defense and they're going to pull the SRE in? How are you doing that? Like, that's something you got to figure out. There's pros and cons in both directions. I would also pick one application or one service that you're going to kind of really, really get golden, right? Like, try to make one that you're really proud of from an observability standpoint. Define and measure some SLOs, SLIs, all that type of stuff. Have an example that everybody else can look at and understand the benefit. It's not just an abstract idea. It's like, oh, wow, okay, cool. This is how that would work.
And that should be something that's important, that is visible. Gives you those quick wins, but it's a critical app that is now improving, that has a measurable improvement in the customer experience. That speaks volumes. I remember when the SRE team first started piloting, they picked a couple of my apps to dog food, and they were critical apps. You couldn't load a dashboard without them, but they made them really, really nice. That really helped to fuel the fire again towards SRE being important. Make it important, make it visible, and make it measurable. It definitely helps with making sure SRE gets cemented into that position.
Just find that painful thing, right? Like the toil reduction piece. Go into retros, go into whatever you need to go into. Survey your apps. Find something that's painful that everyone hates and get rid of it. That will make a big difference. Get those early wins. All right, that's about it. If somebody's out there building an SRE practice, let us know how it goes. Hopefully this was helpful to you.
Or hit us up, send us an email, hello@devgrid.io, and we are happy to help answer questions or drop something in the comments.
Sure.
Let's continue the conversation. We're on LinkedIn. We're on all the social medias that we can.
Twitter, Yeah. So again, it's a cultural and engineering shift. It's not a rebranding of existing processes. You want to define your mission with a charter, really focus on trying to reduce toil and just focus on getting wins for your team and making things incrementally better. You'll be shocked how much improvement you'll get out of it. So thanks again, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
See ya.